This video is about production planning. The objective of production planning is to match priority with capacity. Priority is what is needed, when and how much, and this is one that comes from the customer side. And capacity is the capability of an organization to produce what is needed and when. And capacity comes from organization side. So priority represents customer side and capacity represents organization side. And these two sides, they must match each other and must be aligned. If priority side is greater than capacity side, organization will not be able to fulfill customer orders. On the other hand, if capacity side is greater than priority side, that would mean that organization has greater capacity or it is spending more on capacity compared to what customers are willing to buy. In that case, organization will be spending more on resources and it would lose its competitiveness in the long run. So therefore, it is essential that priority side that comes from the customer side aligned with the capability of organization. These are the levels in planning and control. The first one is strategic business planning. That's about top level, about product, about markets, and growth strategies. Then the next one is production plans. That is about families of products, whereby similar type of products, their planning is carried out. Then the next one is master production schedule. That's about planning of individual items. Then material requirement plans. That is about planning for raw materials and other associated details of product. And the last thing is purchasing and production activity control. That's about controlling and managing the flow of materials in the factory. So this is a hierarchy whereby at the top is strategic business plan. And from strategic business plan, production plan is derived. That gives rise to master production schedule, and then material requirement plan, and then production activity control and purchasing. So as you can see that these four things, from strategic business planning to material requirement plan, represent planning stage, whereby purchasing and production activity control represent implementation stage. In this hierarchy, the top one is strategic business plan. That's about broad direction of the firm, about product lines, about markets, about growth, and how the company wants to compete in the market. And senior management from all functions are responsible for input. So that's a top level planning. Then production plan is about product group of families, which mean the products that are very similar to each other. For example, if a pharmaceutical company is making different types of products, tablets will make one type of family. On the other hand, injectables would make another type of family. Production plan involves calculating quantities of each product group to be produced each period and desired inventory levels and what type of resources would be needed, what equipment will be needed, how much labor would be needed, and how much raw material and other resources would be needed. And if those resources are actually available, production planning is also called as aggregate production plan. Production plan is followed by master production schedule. Master production schedule is about individual and items. So in contrast to production plan that was about product families, this is about individual and items. Accordingly, level of details is greater than the production plan and it concerns end items versus groups. Time periods are usually shorter, for example, weeks versus months. And then the next element in this hierarchy is material requirements plan. Material requirement plan is more specific compared to master production schedule. It's planned for producing and purchasing components used to make the items in the master production schedule. So for example, if a kid is making a castle, their MRP would be what kind of blocks they need to make a castle, how many blocks, what size blocks, and when they need it. MRP is basically a detailed schedule for producing something. Then at the lowest level in this hierarchy is purchasing. That's about purchasing of raw materials and components. And production activity control, that's planning, controlling, and managing the flow of work through the factory. In contrast to other levels, purchasing and production activity control represent the implementation stage. So this is the plan stage and this is the implementation stage. Strategies for production plan. Demand pattern. So this is the demand pattern which shows how demand follows. In this graph, on x-axis we have time, on y-axis we have number of units. And this is demand that usually keeps fluctuating. For example, at this point, demand is this. At this point of time, demand is relatively low. At this point, demand is relatively high. And at this point, demand is again plummeting. So that's a typical pattern that demand follows. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it is low. And in order to fulfill this demand, organization needs some strategy. And the first strategy that we are going to discuss to meet this demand is chase strategy. So the idea of chase strategy is that organization would be following this demand. If at this level, whatever is the number of unit or whatever is the demand, organization will be producing that. If at this point demand is low, organization will produce less quantity. At this point, demand is high, organization will produce more. At this point, demand is low, so organization will also produce less quantity, producing the amounts demanded at any given time. A firm would manufacture the amount that is needed. For example, restaurants. Restaurants follow this strategy. Restaurants prepare meals depending upon orders. Every time there is an order, a restaurant would start preparing that order. The company must have enough capacity to meet the peak demand. So this is a critical point. When an organization is following chase strategy, then there will be certain periods when demand will be low and at other periods demand will be high. So when demand will be high, at this point organization should be ready. They should have all inventory and all materials, machinery available to meet this demand. Another example of chase strategy is farmers. Farmers need to wait for the season because their crops grow in particular seasons. And when that season comes, they need to be prepared for that. Their seed, equipments, and all supplies should be available when that particular season comes. And the advantage is that inventory can be kept to a minimum as you only make what is needed. So this is about chase strategy. This solid line represents demand. Broken line represents production level. As you can see at this point, if this is the demand level, then this is the production level represented by broken line. As demand level goes down, production level also goes down. If demand level goes up, production level also goes up. So production is essentially chasing the demand curve, and therefore this strategy is called as chase. Then the next strategy is called as level production. In contrast to chase production, whereby we see that demand and production follow these type of curves, level production is about producing the same amount every time. In this case, organization will establish average demand level and set production rate to that level. So there will be one production level that will be carried out throughout. There will not be any variations. It is often used when resources are difficult or very expensive to change. A company will make very good forecasts. They will use some good forecasting technique to determine what should be that level, that consistent level that they will be producing throughout. The advantage of this strategy is that it results in smooth level production that avoids the cost of changing production level. So you don't have to sometime produce more and sometime produce less, or again produce more or produce less, but it's the same level, consistent level that you are producing throughout. And that's called as level production strategy. And accordingly, in this strategy, company will use its resources at a uniform rate. This is the graph for level production strategy. This line, the continuous line, represents demand, and this broken line represents level of production. So when we compare it with chase strategy, we know that in chase strategy, this production level, it also changes with demand level like this one. However, in level production strategy, there is a single level that is produced throughout. So no matter it's period 1, period 2, 3, 4, 5, it's the same level that's being produced. Whenever demand is low, then it doesn't matter, or if demand is high, organization is producing the same quantity throughout all the periods. When demand is low, of course, at this point, production is relatively greater than demand. Therefore, inventory will build up. And when demand is high compared to production, then build up inventory will be used. And then the third strategy is called as hybrid strategy. Hybrid strategy is a combination of chase strategy and leveling strategy. It's a combination of these two, and it depends upon different type of contingencies. Accordingly, there is no specific formula. You have to take into consideration different organizational contingencies. Now, here are some examples. A company wants to produce 10,000 units of an item over the next 3 months. So this is the demand. In other words, they have to produce it over the next 3 months at a uniform rate. Okay, because it's uniform, so which means it would be level production strategy. So in this case, we'll be using level production strategy because it's uniform rate. Because of an annual shutdown in the third month, the first month has 20 work days, the second 21 work days, and the third has 12 working days. So which means the total number of working days will be 20 plus 21 plus 12, that will be 53. So they have 53 working days and they have to produce 10,000 units. Now the question is, on the average, how much should the company produce each day to level production? Now we know that in level production, a company has to produce the same amount in every period. And in this case, our unit of period is days. So we want to calculate the quantity to be produced each day. In other words, we want to produce 10,000 units over 53 days. So we will simply divide 10,000 by 53. So our total production, and to achieve level production strategy, we will divide total production by 53, and that will give us 188.7 units per day. This is an example of hybrid strategy, and as you can see here in hybrid strategy, this continuous line that represents demand and this dotted line that represents production. So as you can see that production level also varies. It changes. At this point it's high, then it goes down, and then it's constant. That's level production strategy. Then it increases, and then again level for a short period of time, then decreases, then again it remains constant, and then again decreases, like that. So in this strategy, we are using combination, and that combination is determined by contingencies, whether some material is available or some equipments are available or not. Here are some terms that will be used in production planning. So the first one is ending inventory. Ending inventory is a company's inventory level at the end of a period. And the formula for this one is ending inventory is equal to opening inventory plus production minus demand. So this is also called as ending inventory is OPD. O for opening inventory, P for production, and minus D for demand. And then a similar term to ending inventory is planned inventory, which means it's the inventory level a company intends to maintain at the end of the period. It's calculated in the same way as ending inventory. Planned inventory is usually associated with planned production, while ending inventory is usually associated with production in problems. This means when a problem says planned production, they will also use the term planned inventory. And when they are just using production, they will be using ending inventory. And another thing is demand and forecast. So these are two things that are many times used interchangeably, demand and forecast. Now here is an example. If the opening inventory is 500 units and demand is 800 units and production is 700 units, what will be the ending inventory? Again, we'll be using this formula, that's ending inventory is equal to opening inventory plus production minus demand, OPD. And opening inventory, we know it's 500 units. And then production level is 700 units that will be added, minus demand or forecast is 800 units. So 500 plus 700 is 1200 minus 800 is equal to 400. So which mean ending inventory will be 400 units, which mean at the end of the production period, organization will be left with this inventory. Now here is another example. Suppose the forecasted demand for a product family looks like the following. Develop a production plan using level strategy. Okay, so here is level strategy. That's a critical piece of information, which means that for all these period we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So for all these period we have to produce the same quantity. And another critical piece of information is this starting inventory. They have 100 units upfront in the beginning, and our job is to make a production plan using level strategy and calculate planned inventory. Now, because it is about level strategy, so we have to determine how much quantity needs to be produced every period. We know that the total is 960 unit. That's a demand. 960 units are required. So we will divide 960 by 6 periods. We have 6 period here. So 960 divided by 6 is about 160. So which mean that we need to produce 160 unit in every period. And if we do so, that will give us 960 units. So here's more calculation. We have 960, that's the demand level, total demand level, and when that was divided by period, number of periods, that's 6 period, 960 divided by 6 is equal to 160. So this will be 160. This whole row will be 160 because it's level production strategy. It means the same amount should be in all periods. Now we have to add a little bit more information. For example, one information we have is the firm already has 100 units. So we'll be using this formula, that's planned inventory is equal to starting inventory, that's the amount of units we have upfront, plus production minus demand. We can call it OPD, that's opening inventory, plus production, and minus demand, OPD. So for period 1, we know that our starting inventory is 100, which means when they start production, this was already there. So 100 plus production level 160 and minus 150, that will be equal to 110. So that will be the planned inventory, and this is the calculation. So planned inventory is equal to starting inventory, that's 100, and then plus production. Production, we know we are producing 160 units throughout. So plus 160 minus demand for the first period, and demand or forecast for the first period is 150 minus 150, and that gives 110. So our planned inventory for period 1 will be 110. Now for the next period, again we'll be using the same formula, that's opening inventory plus production minus demand. So it will become like this one, 100 and 160 minus 160. So 160, they will be added minus 160, and that will give rise to 110. So 110 will come here. So this one will become 110. And for period 3, 110 plus 160 minus 180. So this part will be added, 110 plus 160 will be added, and then from that sum we will subtract 180, and that will give us 90. So 90 comes here. And then for period 4, 90 plus 160 minus 175. So this one will be added, and this one will be subtracted, 90 plus 160 minus 175, and then similarly we will keep doing this, 75 plus 160 minus 155, and that would give rise to 80, and then 80 plus 160 minus 140, and again this one will be added, 80 and 160 will be added, and then 140 will be subtracted, and that would give us 100. And we will stop here because we have 6 periods, so we will stop here. So that's our production plan. Now using the same thing but using chase strategy. Now in chase strategy we are not producing the same amount in every period, but our production depends upon what is the demand. So for example, over here demand is 150. So we will also be producing 150. Over here, demand is 160, so therefore, firm will also produce 160. If demand is 180, then firm will produce 180. So as you can see that in all these periods, whatever is the demand, organization is producing exactly the same quantity. And total forecast is equal to total planned production. And this planned inventory, it remains the same throughout. Again, we can use the same formula to calculate planned inventory, which means opening inventory plus production minus demand. So for example, in this case, it will be 100 plus 150. That will be 250. 250 minus 150 is equal to 100. And then again, we can do the same thing here. 100 and plus 160, they will be added, and then 160 will be subtracted. That will give us 100. 100 plus 180, that's 280, minus 180 is 100. So planned inventory remains the same, and this is called as J's strategy. For hybrid strategy, there is no specific formula because it depends upon organizational contingencies. Maybe sometime a machine is available, at another time a machine is not available. Sometime a raw material is available and another component is not available. So in hybrid, it depends upon organizational contingencies. So for example, over here you can see if the demand is 150, organization is producing 150. Now why they are producing 140? We need more information because they are using their own contingencies. They found that maybe because of availability of machine or availability of raw material, they decided to produce 140 here, 140, 140, and 175 this one. There is no specific formula, and everyone, if you, in the absence of information, everyone will come across a different answer. So when you will be doing all these things, maybe you will have a different answer from all these. Again, because the thing is that some critical information would be missing, that what were those contingencies based on which organization decided to produce 150. What were those contingencies based on which organization decided to produce 175? There is no formula for hybrid strategy, and answers will vary. Now, here is another example whereby we are supposed to develop a production plan. So it says make a production plan for the following. A production line is to run at 1000 units per month. Now, in this case, planned production is given, which means essentially it's a level strategy because they are producing the same amount throughout. The opening inventory is 600 units. All periods have the same number of working days, and we have to develop this production plan, and more specifically, we have to fill this row that's planned inventory, which means what will be inventory by the end of period 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And again, we'll be using the same formula, that's planned inventory is equal to OPD, and our approach will be the same. 600 plus 1000 minus 830. So 600 plus 1000, they will be added, and 830 will be subtracted. So 1600 minus 830, and that will be 770. So that will be planned inventory by period 1. And for the next one, 770 plus 1000 minus 800. So this one is going to add and this one is going to be subtracted. So 1770 minus 800, and that will be 970. So here is the answer: 770, 970, and then 920. So 920 plus 1000 minus 1600, and that will give us 320. Then 320, that's the inventory that's available before period 5 starts. So 320 plus 1000 minus 1000, and that would give 320. And again, 320 is the amount of inventory that's available before period 6 starts. 320 plus 1000 minus 850, and that would give us 170. This means when the whole production period stops, then they will be left with 170 units. Now, I will show you how to do the same thing using Microsoft Excel. So this is the data. It says a company wants to develop a level production. So level production, which means that's a key information, which means whatever they decide to produce, the same quantity need to be produced throughout all these 6 periods. And this is in contrast to chase strategy, whereby production varies depending upon demand in each period. So this is one critical information, that strategy is level strategy. And the opening inventory is 100 units. Okay, so this is opening inventory 100 units, and an increase to 180 units is expected by the end of the plan. So this is ending inventory, which means when organization stops producing by the end of period 6, they should have 180 units here. So ending inventory will be 180, which means by the end of period 6, we are expecting that we should have 180 units. Now again, the opening inventory is 100, but they want an increase to 180 units. So which means while over here for period 1, 100 units are available, by the end of period 6, we should have 180 units here. The demand for each period is given in what follows: how much should the company produce and what will be the ending inventory. So in this case, we'll be developing a production plan. Now, for this one, because we will be using level strategy, so our first step is to calculate forecast total. So this is our forecast and demand. We'll be calculating the total, which means 89 plus 100 plus 120 plus 120 plus 127 plus 120. And for that, I'll use the sum of all these 6 periods. Total demand is 676. Now, the next step is we have to calculate this total production. And for that, we'll be using this formula. So this is the formula, that's ending inventory is equal to opening inventory plus production minus demand, that's OPD. But over here, instead of calculating ending inventory, we want to calculate production, the desired level of production. So we will tweak this formula and this formula, they are exactly the same, but this one is just tweaked a little bit to calculate production. So to calculate total production, I'll be using this formula, and that is equal to ending inventory. So is equal to ending inventory minus opening inventory. So this is our opening inventory. And then the formula says plus demand. So plus total demand, and total demand is 676. And if I hit enter, it tells us that the total production that we need is 756. Now, this is the level of production. Now, you can see it's a little bit different from the demand. Our total demand that's required orders from the customer, that's 676, but we are going to produce 756. And the reason is that because this information, it accommodates opening inventory and ending inventory. And when we accommodate this information, these two pieces of information into demand, then our total production level would be 756. So which means we need to produce 756 units in order to meet these conditions. That's opening inventory, accommodating that, and making sure that we are left with 180 units. We need to produce 756 units. Now, the next thing is that because it's a level strategy, we need to divide this by the total number of periods. Now over here, that's number of periods. How many periods we have? We have 6 periods. So you can enter here 6, or you can also use this formula, that's count A. That's just counting these 6, and it would give us 6. Production per period, and production per period will be total production divided by number of periods, which means 756 divided by 6, and that would give us amount that is to be produced in each period, and that's 126. So 126 is the amount that needs to be produced in each of these periods. So I'm going to transfer this 126 to these periods. So I will copy this, and instead of just pasting it, I will paste it as values, because there's an underlying formula. So I want to paste it as values. So here I will click paste values. As you can see, 126 has been pasted throughout. And then in the next step, I will take total. I can take total of all these 126 multiplied by 6, or I can just drag this one down. So that's 756. That's the total production that we need. So the first step was to calculate total forecast that we did. It was 676, and then we calculated total production using this formula, which is essentially a variation of our formula, that's OPD. And by using that formula, we calculated total production. It was 756, and this 756, it included opening inventory level, ending inventory level, and the demand level. And then after that, I calculated production per period, and then I transferred it here. And now we are only left with one thing, that's planned inventory, only this row. And for that period, for that purpose, we'll be using this formula, that's ending inventory is equal to opening inventory plus production minus demand. So for the first one, I'll be doing it manually. So it's opening inventory. We know opening inventory is 100. We have been told here 100. I have also written it here 100. So is equal to 100 plus production. This is production minus demand 89. That gives us 137. So which means by the end of period 1, we will be left with 137. When period 1 starts, we had 100 units, but when period 1 finishes, we are left with 137 units that will be available for next period. And for this one, again, I'll be using the same formula, that's OPD, opening inventory, and opening inventory is 137 plus production, planned production 126 minus demand 100. And if I hit enter, that gives us 163. Now I can drag on this formula. Remember, for the first two, you need to enter formulas manually. But once you have entered the second one, then we can drag it, and we need to drag it up to zero point 0.6. And as you can see here, that planned inventory for period 3 is 169, which means when period 3 finishes, then 169 units will be available for period 4, and then 175 and 174 and then 180. So we have 6 periods. So by the end of 6 period, we are left with 180 units. Now let's make sense of all this production planning. So in this case, we were required to develop a production plan, and we were required to accommodate this information, whereby opening inventory is 100 units and ending inventory of 180 units. And we were required to use level strategy, which means we are required to produce the same amount for every period. And for that purpose, we calculated total demand, and then we calculated total production level divided by 6 periods, and then we calculated production per period 126, and that 126 was transferred here, and then we calculated planned inventory. So all the conditions are met. We had 100 units, they were accommodated here. We needed 180 units at the end of this whole production period. We got 180 units at the end. So this is 180 units left. And we were required to use level strategy. We did it. We are making 126 units throughout all these periods, which mean the same quantity. That's level strategy. Now it's time to wrap up. So here are some key takeaways. In this lecture, we discussed about hierarchy of planning. In strategic business planning, the main idea is that there is top level planning, planning about products, about market, and about growth strategies. And then production planning, that is about planning about the family of product. And then MPS, that's about planning of individual items. And then material requirement planning, also called as MRP, that's more detailed planning all the components needed to make that particular product. And then purchasing, that's procuring raw material, and PAC, production activity control, that's how these raw materials and all other resources will be engaged to produce that particular product. And then we discussed production strategies, 3 strategies: chase, whereby Organizations follow the demand. Their production changes with demand level, whereby they produce one specified quantity throughout, irrespective of fluctuations in demand. And then hybrid, whereby organizations may use different combinations of chase and level depending upon their contingencies. And finally, we discussed developing a production plan using Microsoft Excel.